Yeah,
Great.
perfect. Thanks.
Thank you, Mo. So I just really wanted to share our kind of use case and what we're looking at the moment with regards to the recent amendments to the building regulations and the introduction of a new principal designer role. And really, to kind of ground this in reality and the morality, we have to remember what happened with the Grenfell Tower tragedy in June 2017, and the 72 lives that were lost as part of the biggest residential fire since World War II. Off the back of Grenfell, there was a very, very stark, very, very troubling diagram that was shared on the BBC website, kind of highlighting who was blaming who and who was suing who within the industry. And that's a significant thing to kind of reflect on when we think about what the purpose of this new legislation is in terms of creating accountability. Um, Another thing to reflect upon is the Hackett report, a big document, but really to summarise, what the findings were and what the recommendations were was um, what we are designing in the industry and what we are building and the information that we're handing over at the end of the project are disparate. They're three very separate things, and there is an aspiration that this new legislation underpins in terms of the Building Safety Act and the subsequent secondary legislation to create a golden thread of information through that process to improve the integrity of fire and building safety. So when we talk about the Building Safety Act, and I'm still having these conversations today with people, we are not just talking about high-rise residential buildings. What we're talking about is all building projects in England today. Okay, this is a far-reaching piece of legislation. So not just those buildings that are 18 meters or 7 stories with 2 or more residential units, but every building project in England right now. So, as I said, there's secondary legislation beyond what came out in 2022 with the Building Safety Act, and probably one of the most fundamental ones is the amendment to the building regulations, which came into force as of the 1st of October. I think it came out probably about halfway through September. So there's been little time to react to this new piece of legislation. But what this new piece of legislation says is that there are new duties for clients, contractors, designers, and principal contractors, as well as a new principal designer role. This is to, as I said, create a bit more accountability within the built environment. One thing is to be very clear upon as well is, we're talking about principal designer here. This is something that's very separate from what we already do under the CDM regulations. Your CDM principal designer is very subjectively focused upon the applications of the general principles of prevention, so eliminating risk, or if not, reducing risk and providing subsequent information. The building regulations principal designer is very objectively focused on compliance with the relevant requirements of the building regs. So just as an illustration, we've got the old structure in terms of what we did under CDM. So the client, the principal contractor, principal designer, and then all of the designers and contractors. And then the new structure that we're working under today, with the client, principal contractor, and designers and contractors holding duties under both sets of legislation, and then the separate principal designer roles. Key thing to say with this is that the CDM principal designer and building regs principal designer can be the same person and organization if they satisfy the competency requirements, or they can be different as well. So this new building regs principal designer has a very clear kind of overarching duty. and that is to take all reasonable steps, which is a key legal term here in the legislation, um, to ensure that the design work of all the designers is coordinated so that if it is built, the building work which the design relates would be in compliance with the relevant requirements. That's really done by ensuring that the persons working on the project are cooperating with each other and the other parties involved, but also through a checking process that the other designers individually are working to the relevant requirements as well. As I found with these presentations, when I talk about relevant requirements, it's important to clarify this. These are just the approved documents essentially under the building regulations. So Part A around structure, Part B around fire safety, and so on. Um, all the approved documents, quite large, bits of information to wade through, but there's that very key green box in all of the approved documents, which is actually just the legislative requirement that we need to satisfy. So across the board, we need to ensure that we're meeting, those requirements when we're designing a building. So how does that look? Well, as an example, if we take M41, when we're talking about visitable dwellings, access and use, the legislation says we just need to make reasonable provision for gaining access using the dwelling and its facilities. Quite open, quite subjective, but that's backed up by some guidance on the right hand side to say what that actually looks like, and then for us it's about assigning primary responsibility to a relevant party for providing evidence against that, and then collating that evidence. So the relevant requirements are quite big. We can imagine that we're going to be collating multiple pieces of evidence per bit of legislation as well. And really, we could be in the realms of handling hundreds and hundreds of documents to create and substantiate a case, for why this design is compliant. And what we're talking about there is just a lot of administration at the end of the day. So to go through that process of assigning, responsibility, primary and secondary, and identifying work stages when we need that information, whether that be part of a submission to local building control or approved inspectors, or if it's a higher risk building, sending that to the regulator. It's important that we map this out so we've got the information to hand so we can produce the documents relevant for the submission. Um, Once we've established that responsibility, it's really about starting to collate and track that compliance. So in a very crude way, and I know there's certainly a shout for getting away from Excel, but we've created a tracker, and this is kind of the basis of what we've been working off since we've started to take on these building regulations principal designer roles. But it's a lot of work. And really, this is where Mortars came to the forefront of our thinking. Um, you know, if we are to collate that information, we're pulling it away from the CDE. Also, we don't know what CDEs we're going to be working in from project to project. It would differ from client to client, from principal contractor to principal contractor as well. So it's about having a standardized approach to what we do. And also, with Morta, we're thinking, well, it might not be that we're just pulling evidence from one source, but it might be multiple sources as well. So Morta, as it is, it's the bit between the bricks, it's the bit between the software, and it's a safe place that we can collate, pull information from the CDE, be able to review that information and validate it ahead of our submissions. So for us, it's a work in progress. It's something that myself and Mo have been tackling over the last couple of months. But we've made some real consequential steps towards this now. now in producing our draft tracker that we're starting to look at deploying on some high-rise residential schemes at the moment. And really just about replicating what we've done within that Excel format, but also having that, absolute flexibility to kind of assign all those responsibilities, and to be able to use the integrations function to be able to link to the different CDEs that we want to work with, to be able to pull that information into Morta as well and go through that validation process. I think one of the key things that we've learned, and I apologize, Mo, I didn't get around to developing a slide on this, is that what we can do with this is create different views for different users. So when we're assigning kind of primary and secondary responsibility, we can filter the views by the different users. So if a structural engineer was to visit the platform, they would only see the relevant sections where they need to provide evidence. So they can then go through the integration and just link the relevant documents, drawings, whatever it is, to kind of provide that evidence for us as building regulations principal designers to review. One thing I am really excited about, and obviously we've got to go through this process first, is how we might be able to automate this going forward. And we spoke there with Rob and Graham about kind of simplifying and standardization. For me, the standardization of this process is a real key for some quick wins in what we do. When we are producing information and uploading it to a CDE, we should be able to provide classification as part of the metadata for those files. Whether that be a project management code or whatever it is under Uniclass. What we'll find is that the typical evidence required for satisfying a said part of the building regulations will be pretty consistent across the board. So an example I would give is under the building regulations A2 around ground conditions, and what we will know is that we're probably going to need a flood risk assessment, and we're probably going to need a site investigation report. Um, those will have a set classification under Uniclass, and if we can get Mortar in a place where it's intelligent enough to pull that information automatically from a CDE, we're already pre-populating that information, ready for validation and reviewing. And I think that's a really big step, and for not just you know, cutting out a lot of the admin potential for misinformation, issues with version control when we're doing our submissions, but also that automation piece as well, and just kind of creating efficiencies in what we do. So this is something I'm really interested in at the moment. Um, but I think the ultimate thing to kind of touch on, and we touched upon reporting as part of our panel discussion earlier, being able to export information out of Morta is very important. Um, whether it's something that we need to do to provide to a local authority in terms of our building control application, or whether it's part of our gateway to submission to the regulator, we're always going to be able to we're going to be asked to substantiate, why we have done what we've done in design. So if it's pulling those bits of evidence together, or even just generating a report to say what um, files are referenced against which part of the building regulations, we're starting to create a really important report for being able to demonstrate, our compliance. So just in summary, for us, and it's a journey we've been on so far, but we absolutely see, how this can reduce administration, just going from that analog process with Excel through to something more intelligent. The flexibility it provides us in terms of working with a variety of CDE, so we can use this across multiple projects and also multiple platforms on a project as well, and being able to collate that report for submission and the absolute kind of next step for us is that automation through document information classification. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Alan. That was brilliant. I know it's a topic that many of the people that are in the community are thinking about. So I really appreciate you sharing your insights and what you're looking at, and also not just what you're doing now, but also how you see it evolving in the future. So thanks a lot for being with us today.
Cheers, Mo. Thank you.